Hey everyone, and welcome to Real Talk Grimm Edition. I'm your host Josh, and this is the place where we dive into the dark, whimsical world of the Brothers Grimm. Whether you're a longtime fan of fairy tales or just starting to discover them, you're in the right spot. Each episode, I'll read a classic Grimm's fairy tale and then explore its deeper meanings, lessons, and how it may apply to our modern culture. From the well-known stories like Cinderella to more obscure ones that still carry a punch, we're going to get into what makes these tales so timeless, and sometimes downright eerie. But this isn't just about reading stories. It's about peeling back the layers and looking at what these stories really teach us. The Grimm brothers didn't shy away from showing the darker side of life. And in many ways, those darker elements hold some of the most powerful messages. Whether it's about good versus evil, human nature, or just the consequences of choices. So whether you're here for the ride of a familiar story or to uncover something you haven't heard before, stick with me as we explore the fascinating and sometimes twisted world of Grimm's fairy tales. Today, we're going to be reading my favorite Grimm story, The Robber Bridegroom. So grab your favorite drink, sit back, and enjoy the tale. The Robber Bridegroom. There was once a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and when she was grown up, he became anxious that she should be well married and taken care of. So he thought, if a decent sort of man comes and asks her in marriage, I will give her to him. Soon after, a suitor came forward who seemed very well to do, and as the miller knew nothing to his disadvantage, he promised him his daughter. But the girl did not seem to love him as a bride should love her bridegroom. She had no confidence in him. As often as she saw him or thought about him, she felt a chill at her heart. One day he said to her, "You are to be my bride, and yet you have never been to see me." The girl answered, "I do not know where your house is." Then he said, "My house is a long way in the wood." She began to make excuses and said she could not find the way to it. But the bridegroom said, "You must come and pay me a visit next Sunday. I have already invited company, and I will strew ashes on the path through the wood so that you will be sure to find it." When Sunday came and the girl set out on her way, she felt very uneasy without knowing exactly why. And she filled both pockets full of peas and lentils. There were ashes strewn on the path through the wood, but nevertheless at each step she cast to the right and left a few peas on the ground. So she went on the whole day until she came to the middle of the wood, where it was the darkest, and there stood a lonely house. Not pleasant in her eyes, for it was dismal and unhomelike. She walked in, but there was no one there, and the greatest stillness reigned. Suddenly she heard a voice cry, turn back, thou pretty bride, within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." The girl glanced around and perceived that the voice came from a bird who was hanging in a cage by the wall, and again it cried, turn back, thou pretty bride, within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." Then the pretty bride went on from one room into another through the whole house, but it was quite empty, and no soul to be found in it. At last she reached the cellar, and there sat a very old woman nodding her head. "Can you tell me," said the bride, "if my bridegroom lives here?" "Oh, poor child," answered the old woman, "do you know what has happened to you? You are in a place of cutthroats. You thought you were a bride and soon to be married, but death will be your spouse. Look here, I have a great kettle of water to set on, And when once they have you in their power, they will cut you in pieces without mercy, cook you and eat you, for they are cannibals. Unless I have pity on you and save you, all is over with you." Then the old woman hid her behind a great cask where she could not be seen. "Be as still as a mouse," said she. "Do not move or go away, or else you are lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have been waiting a long time for an opportunity." No sooner was it settled than the wicked gang entered the house. They brought another young woman with them, dragging her along, and they were drunk and would not listen to her cries and groans. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, 1 of white wine, 1 of red, and 1 of yellow, and then they cut her in pieces. The poor bride all the while shaking and trembling when she saw what a fate the robbers had intended for her. One of them noticed on the little finger of their victim a golden ring, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took an axe and chopped it off. But the finger jumped away and fell behind the cask on the bride's lap. The robber took up a light to look for it, but he could not find it. Then said one of the others, "Have you looked behind the great cask?" But the old woman cried, "Come to supper and leave off looking till tomorrow. The finger cannot run away." Then the robbers said the old woman was right, and they left off searching and sat down to eat. And the old woman dropped some sleeping stuff into their wine, so that before long they stretched themselves on the cellar floor, sleeping and snoring. When the bride heard that, she came from behind the cask and had to make her way among the sleepers lying all about on the ground. And she felt very much afraid lest she might awaken any of them. But by good luck she passed through, and the old woman with her, and they opened the door, and they made all haste to leave that house of murderers. The wind had carried away the ashes from the path, but the peas and lentils had budded and sprung up, and the moonshine upon them showed the way. And they went on through the night, till in the morning they reached the mill. Then the girl related to her father all that had happened to her. When the wedding day came, the friends and neighbors assembled, the miller having invited them, and the bridegroom also appeared. When they were all seated at the table, each one had to tell a story, but the bride sat still and said nothing, till at last the bridegroom said to her, "Now, sweetheart, do you know no story? Tell us something." She answered, "I will tell you my dream. I was going alone through a wood, and I came at last to a house in which there was no living soul. But by the wall was a bird in a cage who cried, 'Turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for evil things do here betide.' And then again it said it. Sweetheart, the dream is not ended. Then I went through all the rooms, and they were all empty, and it was so lonely and wretched. At last I went down into the cellar, and there sat an old woman, nodding her head. I asked her if my bridegroom lived in that house, and she answered, 'Ah, poor child, you have come into a place of cutthroats. Your bridegroom does live here, but he will kill you and cut you in pieces, and then cook you and eat you. Sweetheart, the dream is not ended.' But the old woman hid me behind a great cask, and no sooner had she done so than the robbers came home, dragging with them a young woman. And they gave her to drink wine thrice, white, red, and yellow. Sweetheart, the dream is not yet ended. And then they killed her and cut her in pieces. Sweetheart, my dream is not yet ended. And one of the robbers saw a gold ring on the finger of the young woman, and as it was difficult to get off, he took an axe and chopped off the finger, which jumped upwards and then fell behind the great cask on my lap. And here is the finger with the ring." At these words she drew it forth and showed it to the company. The robber, who during the story had grown deadly white, sprang up and would have escaped, but the folks held him fast and delivered him up to justice. And he and his whole gang were, for their evil deeds, condemned and executed. All right. So, as I told you, that was my favorite Grimm fairy tale, The Robber Bridegroom. This was the story that made me want to start this podcast, because it's everything I love about these old tales. It's dark, suspenseful, and full of twists. But at the heart of it, there's a lesson that still hits hard today. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's a warning. We've got deception, cannibalism, murder, and a heroine who has to outsmart a gang of killers just to survive. This is one of those stories that reminds us that the Grimm brothers weren't just writing bedtime stories. They were collecting cautionary tales. And this one, it's a giant flashing red light saying, pay attention, trust your instincts, and evil doesn't always look evil. And right from the start, the miller's daughter has a bad feeling about her fiancé. There's no logical reason for it, just a gut instinct that something isn't right. And she's absolutely correct. If she had ignored that feeling, she never would have made it out alive. And I think that's something we struggle with today. We're often told to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to ignore that little nagging voice in our heads. But sometimes that gut feeling is the best defense we have. Whether it's a shady deal, a manipulative person, or a situation that just doesn't feel safe, listen to your instincts. And what makes this story terrifying is that the bridegroom isn't an obvious villain. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like a respectable, successful man. I mean, he's charming enough to convince the miller that he's a great match for his daughter. But underneath that polished exterior, he's a murderer and a cannibal. And that's what makes the tale so unsettling. I think it reflects real life. Some of history's worst criminals were people no one expected. Serial killers, con artists, and abusers often present themselves as completely normal, even likable. This story is a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone seems trustworthy, it doesn't mean they are. And I think the thing that I love the most about this story is that the miller's daughter isn't a passive victim. She's a strategist. She doesn't panic. She doesn't try to fight them in the moment. She observes. She gathers evidence. And she waits for just the right time to act. And that's an important lesson. In dangerous situations, brute strength is not always an option. Sometimes survival comes down to playing it smart, staying quiet, collecting the proof, and exposing the truth when it's safest to do so. And I think it's the reason why in the real world, whistleblowers document corruption before speaking out, or why survivors of abuse often need undeniable evidence to be believed. And unlike a lot of the Grimm fairy tales, this one I think actually gives us a satisfying ending. The villains don't just disappear, they don't get away with it. The bridegroom and his gang, they're caught and executed. The miller's daughter doesn't just survive, she wins. Now, that's not always how things play out in real life. Evil people don't always face consequences, not right away at least. Sometimes it takes time. But this story gives us that reassurance that in the end, the truth will come out, and when it does, justice follows. So, why does the Robber Bridegroom still matter today? Well, I think it's because the warnings in the story are just as relevant now as they ever were. So let's start with think about dating apps and social media. It is easier than ever for people to present this false version of themselves. Just like the Robber Bridegroom, he looked like the perfect match. People can curate an image that hides their true intentions. So the takeaway? Be cautious, ask a lot of questions, and pay attention to red flags. And this isn't just about relationships. We see it in politics, business, and even entertainment. People in power know how to make themselves seem trustworthy, even when they aren't. And this story is a reminder to think critically and not always take things at face value. And then the miller's daughter doesn't just survive. She brings the truth to light in a way that ensures justice is served. In the real world, people who expose corruption, abuse, or crime often need solid proof before they're taken seriously. Now, I know it's a sad reality, but this story shows how powerful it is when someone finally speaks the truth. And unlike a lot of the old fairy tales where the princess is just waiting to be rescued, in this one, the miller's daughter rescues herself. She's smart, she's brave, and she's the reason the villain is stopped. And that message is so important today. Survivors deserve to be heard, believed, and supported. So at the end of the day, The Robber Bridegroom is one of my favorite Grimm fairy tales because it does exactly what these stories were meant to do. It warns us. It teaches us to trust our instincts, to look beyond appearances, and to recognize that knowledge and patience can be just as powerful as brute force. And honestly, it is deeply satisfying to see the villain get what's coming to them. And that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk Grimm Edition. I hope you enjoyed diving into The Robber Bridegroom as much as I did. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you have thoughts on today's tale, whether you agree, disagree, or have your own take, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out on social media at Real Talk on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Or send me an email to therealrealtalk@gmail.com. Let me know what you think or just to say hi. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. It really helps others find Real Talk Grimm Edition, and it keeps the conversation going. Don't forget to check out our other two channels, Real Talk and Real Talk Horror Edition, for all things movies. But for now, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, question the stories around you, and keep exploring the darker side of fairy tales.